recording and let's get going. Okay, so today, ladies and gents, we've got Richard the First to start with, possibly one of the most famous kings of England. Oh yes. Now, for those of you who are still going with the sheets and the star ratings and stuff, hopefully King Richard might get a good star rating from you. I mean, he's known as a fantastic king. I mean, he's known as the Lionheart, which is pretty good. I mean, if you've got the heart of a lion, that makes you pretty special. I mean, unless you literally have the heart of a lion, in which case you probably won't survive very long, because I think humans need human hearts and lions have lion hearts, but it's not meant to be taken literally. It's a metaphor for extreme bravery. So, we'll see what you think of Lionheart after we go through his deeds. Now, his dates, 1189 to 1199. So we can see he's not going to rule for too long. 10 years, which, you know, it's better than some, I guess. Oh, hello, good morning. Now, Richard is the son of Henry II, the last king that we saw last time. Now, Henry II had a bit of an issue with Richard whilst he was still alive. In fact, Richard and Richard's older brother Henry rebelled against Henry II with Henry II's own wife, their mum, Eleanor of Aquitaine. So, not a particularly happy family there. But in all this fighting, Richard managed to gain a name for himself as being incredibly brave, an incredibly good fighter, and he is most famous for his battling and fighting, but not so much in England and France. Now, I should say, as an English king, Richard I may not be the best representative, because of all his reign, of his entire life, he only spent 6 months of it in England. He really didn't like the place. Yeah, he was very much more of a fan of France, and as we'll see, other places further east. Yes, Taylor, I did have a very happy Easter, thank you. Yeah. Oh, that's a good question, Laura. So his elder brother Henry died. I believe he got ill and died of dysentery, probably. I'll have to look that up. But yes, he died before he could take over the throne. So by the time Henry II died, Henry the Younger was already dead, and it was then Richard's turn to take the throne because he was the oldest son. Yeah, probably another fine case of pooing to death. We'll see another one of those today, so hooray! Yes, so he's someone who's very used to fighting, to leading armies, to battling, all that kind of stuff. And he was so brave that at times he didn't even bother to wear armor. Oh no, because who needs armor when you have the heart of a lion? Yeah. Now, the fighting that Richard is most famous for isn't in France, though, or in England. It is over in the Holy Land, in the Levant, because Richard was one of the leaders of the Third Crusade. So before we really understand what the Third Crusade is, I suppose we should have some idea of what happened in the First Crusade and the Second Crusade. Aisha and Ammar, it is 1199 when he dies, but 1192, as you can see on the map, is showing us when he's going on crusade. Let's make this map nice and big. Here we go. All right. Our Crusades were a sorry tale from history, as many historical tales are. But the Crusades started in 1095, or at least they were declared in 1095 by the Pope in Rome, around here somewhere. Now, the Pope in 1095 was a man called Urban II. So this is before, quite a long time before Richard I. Yeah. Enea, he didn't live 10 years, he only ruled for 10 years. So he became king in 1189 and he died in 1199. So yes, king for 10 years, but he didn't die when he was 10. Yeah. yeah, Pope Urban II, he decides that he would like to take the Holy Land, and in particular, the city of Jerusalem. Now, for those of you who aren't particularly religiously connected, I'll try and summarize the importance of Jerusalem. A massively important city to three religions. For the Jewish people, it is incredibly important because it was the town that was founded on the spot where Abraham went and founded Canaan. It was home to the first temple and the second temple, the most holy places. The temple itself had a room in it called the Holy of Holies, which held the Ark of the Covenant. And magic blocks that can melt Nazis, according to Indiana Jones. Maybe not. Look it up. Now, so the Jewish people, they find Jerusalem incredibly important, religiously significant, the home of God. Now, later, Christian people, at this time of year especially, find Jerusalem very important because that is where Jesus died. That's the city where he was put on the cross. That's the city where he came back to life again. He was resurrected as of yesterday on Easter Sunday. So to them, it's the most holy city on earth. It's also the second most holy city for Muslims because at first, when Islam was first created, before Mecca took on the importance that it has today, Muhammad, may peace be upon him, he would pray and he taught the first Muslims to pray towards Jerusalem. It was, I am recording this, A Really Lonely Rock. Yes, it's being recorded. So for Muhammad, may peace be upon him, he also went to Jerusalem. He went to the highest point in Jerusalem, and there he rode on a flying horse all the way up to heaven and to Allah. So all in all, a pretty important city for three major world religions. Unsurprisingly, maybe, this leads to some conflict, because of course all of those three religions would very much like Jerusalem to be their city and their city only. And in this time period, the city is home to some Jews and some Christians, but mainly to Muslims, because it's been part of the spreading Muslim empire. Now, Pope Urban II, he's the Pope in Rome, he doesn't like the idea that Jerusalem is owned by Muslims. He instead would like it to be owned by Christians. So he suggests strongly, however you want to look at it, that the kings of Europe, France, Germany, Austria, Britain, Italy, you name it, they should go over and they should take the Holy Land. Now, they do this successfully in the First Crusade, which begins in 1196, and they stomp their way across Europe, following roughly these lines here. One group of peasants, they go on foot, and they all end up dead because, well, they're peasants, and yeah, it turns out they can't fight the mighty armies of the Muslim Caliphate. But the kings, not from Britain this time, England, but from France, including other places, they head off and they take over the Holy Land. They take Jerusalem. Now, this doesn't last for too long. They hold it for about 80 years, and then it is recaptured by this man over here, Saladin. Now, his proper name is far more complicated than that, and I'm not very good at my Arabic pronunciation, so we'll stick him with Saladin. That's it, Rock. Yeah. They're not going to get Jerusalem back, I'm afraid. Brilliant, Armani. You're Muslim, so there you go. Yes, fits us all in this story, which is good. So Saladin, he is kind of a massive hero because he rises from a relatively poor background to be the Sultan, the king of Egypt and Syria, and to bring the Muslim empire together under one great ruler who will then come back and take Jerusalem. Now, often the difference between the Christian Crusaders from Europe and Saladin are explained like this. When the Crusaders took Jerusalem, they killed all of the Muslims there. They just chopped them all to bits. However, when Saladin takes it back, he doesn't kill all the Christians. He kicks them all out, says, please don't come back, but he doesn't kill many of them. He just makes them go. Yeah, and so sometimes that's seen as like the difference in character between these two men. Richard, a bit more the let's kill them kind of guy, although Richard, of course, was not even alive when Jerusalem was taken the first time over. Now, Richard, though, is very much convinced by the Pope, a different Pope by now, Pope Urban II is long dead, to go and try and take Jerusalem back again. And he doesn't just go on his own. He goes with Philip Augustus. He goes with Frederick Barbarossa, the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And the three of them, they head off over to the Holy Land. Now you can see that Frederick Barbarossa, he goes overland. That's his red line here. We've got Richard coming down here from England, all the way along, stopping off as he goes, all the way down to the Holy Land. And then we've got Philip Augustus, he's sort of dotting around here and following along with Richard. Oh, the Pope cannot hear me. I'm sorry about this. Saladin, yeah, not two separate words, not like he has salad in. Let's see, I've got some people saying that the mic is not working. Let me just try. There we go. Josh is saying that salad. No, I know, Chris and Toby. Josh is saying salad is healthy, so it doesn't kill them because he is healthy because he's named after salad. I'm not sure it works like that. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, those. Okay, Danny says it's fine. Sorry, I know that sometimes connections can go weird. Okay. Now, so Saladin is down there waiting. And Richard, Frederick, Philip Augustus, they're all coming along. Philip Augustus from France here. They're coming along to take Jerusalem back, get back what they had for 80 years and then was lost. Now, it's, as you can just guess by this map, it's quite a dangerous, difficult, long journey. Yeah. Now, Frederick Barbarossa, you'll see that his red line doesn't ever quite make it to the Holy Land. He dies here. He falls into a river and just drowns, and that's the end of him. So that's one emperor down. Not a great start to the crusade, I must say. No problem about being late, story. Richard, on the other hand, he's taking ships. And you can see here, he's stopping off all along the way. He's not just trying to get there in one great big hurry, he's taking his time. He even invades the island of Cyprus on his way, which, as you can see, are three colours here. We've got the Catholic world, which is what Richard is. He's a Roman Catholic, being a Western Christian. Then we've got the Eastern world, where the Orthodox Christians live. That's in this kind of pinky salmony colour. And then we've got the Muslim world down here, which is green. Now, you'll notice that the island of Cyprus here that Richard takes over isn't actually Muslim lands. No. He takes that from other Christians and he taxes them very highly. And he needs a lot of money to get himself on his crusade. He takes with him something like 60,000 horses, 100 ships. We're talking huge armies. And he takes them, and he successfully takes the city of Acre and then the city of Jaffa, which is where the cakes come from, or at least the oranges that they used to make the cakes. Ooh. And so he's getting there. He's getting closer and closer to Jerusalem. But unfortunately for him, Jerusalem is not on the menu. Oh, no. More on that in a second. So let's bring that down a bit. So, Richard needs a lot of money to do this. He has to get that huge army already. He has to get all his knights, pay all of them, all of the foot soldiers, pay all of them, make sure they've all got weapons and armor and horses and horse food and person food and water, and you know how it goes. Yeah. He also then needs to have his ships. 100 ships cost a lot of money. He then needs to sail them a very long way, which means a lot of supplies, which means a lot of money. He also needs to go and fight in the Holy Land, which costs a lot of money. Now, back home, he leaves his brother in charge, his brother John. Now, John, as we'll see a bit more about him later, but John is, he's been told that he just needs to, keep the country going, and he's been told that he has to give money to Richard. Richard needs that money to fight in the Holy Land. Yeah. That's cool. Laura's got a book about the Crusades, about a Muslim boy and a Christian boy. Yes, that's right. Yes, there are of course two sides to this, for sure. Yeah, or at least, well, more than two sides, I guess. It brought in everyone, this horrible conflict. Now, back home, everybody is having to pay the price, literally, for these crusades, because Richard, it costs so much money that John, who's left in charge, has to keep raising the taxes. He has to keep taking more money from the people so that that money can get sent over to fight this war to try and win back Jerusalem. And of course, that's where the legends, if I can make him big, that's where the legends of Robin Hood come in, because Robin Hood is an outlaw. He's somebody who, well, an outlaw in those days was a very real thing. We don't know if Robin Hood literally himself was real. Some people say yes, some people say no. But what we do know is there certainly were outlaws, and they certainly would have been living in places like Sherwood Forest in Nottinghamshire. So it makes sense that, even if there wasn't a Robin Hood, there would have been a lot of people like him. An outlaw is someone in the medieval world who has broken the law in some way. Now, if you break the law today, the police will come and they will catch you and put you in jail or whatever. Yeah. Back then, no police force. Back then, there's no real way of catching criminals. If they want to run away, then they've got a lot of room to run away into, and a lot of criminals did go loose. So the system was to put up a sign saying, this guy here, Robin Hood, he's an outlaw. And you'd put up a picture of him, maybe, if you had a sketch artist who could draw one, but more than likely just you'd put his name on a tree or something. And it would say, Robin Hood, outlaw, we will give £50 to the person who brings back his head. And then an outlaw is someone who can be killed by anyone. Anyone in the country, even his own mum, could kill an outlaw and claim that money. So instead of having the police do it, you might well end up being chased by your friends or the people from your village, or just any old people who fancied earning quite a lot of money. And so because you were an outlaw, that meant anyone can kill you without ever being punished for it, plus they get paid for it. So the only thing you can really do then is go and hide in the woods or in the hills or the mountains or wherever you are. So Robin Hood, if he were real and an outlaw, he would have hid in the woods around Nottinghamshire, because there are no mountains. So that makes sense, I guess. So Robin Hood, the legend goes, is very, very angry. He's very angry because John keeps taking money from the poor people. He's always asking for more and more money. He's raising those taxes. He's making it more and more difficult just to get by. And so in the legends, bear with me a second. In the legends, there's, here we go. He fights back. He takes money from the rich and he gives it to the poor. But is it really John's fault, I ask you? Or is John only doing this because Richard's away fighting and Richard keeps on demanding more money? So is it really good King Richard, bad King John? Or is it really annoying King Richard and bad leader John at the same time? I don't know. Was Robin Hood good or bad? That's a good question. So in the legends, Robin Hood is good because he's just trying to help the poor people. If he was real and an outlaw, that means that he would have broken the law in some way. So I don't know. In the stories, he's definitely a good guy. But strangely in the stories, King Richard is the good guy because, of course, eventually King Richard comes back from Crusade and stops John messing around. Bear with me a second. There we go. So, yes, in the story, Richard comes back, saves everyone from John. Everyone has a party, whether it's Sean Connery in the films or whether it's that big lion out of the Disney movie. He comes back, everyone's happy. Robin Hood's like, hooray, we're saved. In reality, it's not quite like that. The reason that John is taking all this money in the first place, is because Richard needs more money for his crusades. And Richard never does come home because Richard hates England. You know, six months of his life is spent in England. The rest of it is spent in France. So even when he does come home from Crusade, he doesn't go to England. I mean, he does visit for about a week, just to show his face again. But you know, he's not the conquering hero returning, and everyone's like, "Well, hey, lovely Richard, we missed you." Because, to be honest, no one had ever seen him anyway. You know, he's just some guy in France who is the king and tells people what to do. Now, also, he's a little bit of a mummy's boy. If we can remember, his mother is Eleanor of Aquitaine. Now, Eleanor, husband, first of all, to King Louis of France, then to Henry II of England. Henry II dies. She is now the mother of the King of England instead of the wife of the King of England. And that means that she's still pretty powerful. Because whilst Richard's away, she does most of the real running. You know, yeah, John's in charge, but John's a bit of a, you know, he's not so good. Yeah. It seems that it might well have been Eleanor who's keeping the ship going, who's trying to make sure that everyone's happy, who's understanding how the country actually is run. Because, of course, Richard and John have had no experience of being kings, like most kings don't when they start. Whereas Eleanor, she's already been queen twice, so she knows a lot about what's going on. She knows how to run a well, that's nice, Taylor. She knows how to run a country, and so she uses that experience and that wisdom that she has. And Richard relies on her a lot. He's a bit of a mummy's boy. He's got, you know, if he's good at fighting, and he's good at going on wars and things, not so good at running the country or doing the maths or the boring bits. You know, let Mum do that. Yeah. Yeah, that's it, Laura. Yeah, they pretty much, him and John. You know, they're good. They're quite experienced in fighting. Richard more so than John. But yes, they haven't got that kind of experience of rulership. It was the older boy, Henry, who had been taught how to be a king, but of course he died before he got the chance to be a king. So all of that knowledge kind of died with him. Now, the Crusade, how old was Richard when he came to the throne? That's a good question. Let's see if I can find out for you. How old was Richard when he came to the throne? So if he died, let me see if I can find his birth date somewhere. Here we go. So he died when he was 41, so he must have been 31 when he came to the throne. 30, 31, something like that. So not massively old, but also, you know, not a child king like some of them. There are a fair few child kings. He's not one of them. So he's had 30 years to prepare. Just, you know, he spent most of it killing things, I guess. That's kind of his style. He's got the heart of a lion. He's so brave. He can't be doing maths and writing things down. No. So his crusade is largely unsuccessful because Saladin defeats him when he tries to take over Jerusalem. Now, it's not totally unsuccessful. Like I said, he took down the cities of Acre. He took down Jaffa. He did take land back from the Muslims that had been previously lost to Saladin. But Saladin ultimately will protect Jerusalem, and it ends up with the Christians, Richard among them, having to surrender to Saladin and to come to some kind of peace agreement. Yeah. No, Danny, Richard doesn't die here, no, and nor does Saladin. He goes on to live for a while after this. But they come to an agreement, and it's quite a fairly fair agreement for this time in history, I must say. Saladin says, okay, you're not going to take Jerusalem. It's mine. It is a Muslim city. We're keeping it. We've had it for hundreds of years. Go away. But, he says, it's only fair that Christians get to visit, because this is a holy city for you as much as it is for us. So as long as all Christians don't bring weapons into the city, you know, they leave their swords or whatever outside, then they can come here and they can pray, and they can do so with my blessing. And so that's kind of where they left it. Jerusalem wasn't taken by the Christians, but it was now open to Christians to at least go and pray in. You know, they're never going to be in control of it again, but they can use it as a religious place. Ritson family is asking, who is Saladin? Saladin is the leader of the Muslim armies at this period in history. He is the Sultan of Egypt and of Syria and a lot of land around that. He's originally a Kurdish man who rose to power by befriending the king of Egypt and then taking over from him after his death. Yeah. Oh, Shadow is saying they are like babies. Richard and John are like babies. That's a bit harsh. They're like war babies. They're babies who can fight. War babies. There's a TV show ready to be made. But yeah, they are a bit immature. They're not. They're a bit laddish. You know, they're not particularly great at ruling. But then I suppose they don't have to be because they've got Eleanor of Aquitaine. They've got like the most intelligent political woman that we've seen in history so far. Helping out. So in some ways, they don't need to be anything more than great warriors, really. Yeah. Oh, a good question there, Laura. Did Christians like Jewish people? So yes, we haven't really mentioned the Jewish people. Now, part of the reason Jewish people are living in England at this time. They're not particularly welcome, it must be said. William the Conqueror, as horrible and evil as he was quite good with Jewish people. He encouraged Jewish people to come and live in England, mainly because they could work the banks, and he wanted people to run the money. Christians, you see, are not allowed to lend money, so you cannot have any Christian banks at this period or anything like it. So they had to bring Jewish people in to do that. Jewish people, though, as everyone knows, have had a very hard time throughout history. Lots of attacks and pogroms and all kinds of things like that. The kings that we're going to see next time, we're going to have a look at Henry III and Edward I. Those two are going to be proper horrible to Jewish people, as we will see next week. But Richard and John, as far as I know, didn't have any particular hatred towards Jewish people. In fact, Jewish people were far more welcome down in the Muslim south than they were in the Christian north. Although, at the time when the Crusades starts, this is starting to change as well. Muslims are putting higher taxes on Jewish people. Jewish people are allowed to be free, and they are allowed to practice their religion in their own way, but they have to pay extra taxes for being Jewish. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's certainly not equality, whereas in most of Christian Europe, Jewish people are purposefully abused and kept down. So there you go. And yes, James, Jesus was Jewish, but I suppose this is fitting at Easter time. For many Christians, of course, it was the Jews who killed Jesus. He was a rebel Jew, and so that's where the unnatural and irrational hatred of Jewish people has come from over history. But we will, as we go through the kings, Edward I will make it illegal to be Jewish in England, and there will be no Jews in England, or at least not openly, for about 800 years, because it is illegal. There you go. So there you go. Oh, bye. Yes. Grace is asking how to do the background. Somewhere on your screen where you can see your face, there should be an option there where you can share, where you can put a screen at the back of you. It's called like a virtual background. So there should be 3 little dots on your screen above you, and if you click those, you should be able to change your background to something else. Yeah. Yes, abuse is wrong. Yes. Yeah. It was very bad to being Jewish in medieval Britain, or well, anywhere really, was pretty bad. So yeah. Avarissa is only giving him 2 stars. Hang on. The story gets better. I'll see if I can retrieve Richard the Lionheart for you, because of course, Richard, he comes home again. I mean, I say home. He comes back to France. But he doesn't get there straight away. Unfortunately for him, as he's traveling back to Europe after having failed to take Jerusalem, he ends up traveling through what is now Austria. The Duke of Austria sees him coming and has him captured and put into jail for no other reason really than the Duke of Austria wants a lot of money. So Richard the Lionheart, he gets put in prison in Austria, and the Austrian Duke sends a message to Brother John, 3 stars. Okay, okay. Sends a message to his brother John and says, we want something like £5,000 to get this guy back, which means that John has to raise the taxes. He has to squeeze the peasants and the people even more. We can imagine Robin Hood getting even more angry as the people get poorer and poorer, because now they need that horrendous amount of money to pay to the Duke of Austria to get brother Richard home, who of course doesn't come home because he hates England anyway. So yeah, it's not great. James is giving him 4.5 stars. 4.5 stars for the Lionheart. Hoo-ha. -7 stars from Laura. Oh my goodness. No, no, no. Now, to be fair to Richard, when he gets oh no, £5,000 in the money back then, we're talking millions. Yeah, you know, the equivalent of modern millions of pounds. Yeah, I should have said that. So poor old John. By this point, he is literally poor. Yeah, England is poor because not only have they had to pay for a disastrous war, you know, hundreds of miles away, that really, you know, a lot of people had no real skin in the game there. It didn't matter to most people. If you were a peasant working in the fields of Lincolnshire or Yorkshire or wherever, you don't really care who owns Jerusalem. You know, it doesn't really affect you day to day. But you've got to pay for it. Yeah, and now they've had to pay for it to come out of no, to get pay the ransom for poor old Richard. Now, Richard, though, he doesn't stop his fighting. Oh no, no. Next, he's going to be spending his time in France, and there's lots of rebellions down in France. He's got problems with the French themselves. At this point, let's have a look at a map, actually. At this point, let's just we'll borrow a map from you there, John. Here we go. France, a lot of France is actually owned by England, mainly, or at least partly, because of Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor, who came from Aquitaine, had meant that the British land, or the English land in France, is all this red stuff here. This is what King Richard has, as well as England itself, of course. So he's doing pretty good. But he's got to defend it. It's constantly trying to be attacked by either the King of France himself or rebels from here or there. And so Richard, he, after the Crusades, goes to France, starts fighting more battles, more wars against these rebels. And unfortunately, this is where he will end his days. People are asking for a picture of Eleanor. Here's the picture we used last time. Here she is, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Of course, we don't actually know what any of these people look like. I mean, the pictures I show you, most of them were drawn, you know, hundreds of years after these people lived. So we have no real idea what Eleanor of Aquitaine looked like, or any of these people. But you know, we can imagine, I guess. Yes, that's it, Joshua. You've got it. Yeah. Oh, hang on. Now I'm zooming. That's no good. All right. So that was Eleanor of Aquitaine right there. So John, he's down there in France fighting his battles, and he decides that he's going to try and take over a castle. And he's the Lionheart, the Coeur de Lion. You know, he's so brave, he doesn't need to wear armor. Oh, no, no. So into battle he rides, armor off, you know, waving his big kingly flag around, when he is defeated by a child. A young boy, probably about 11 or 12 years old. He's on the walls of the castle. He's not a trained soldier. He's armed with a frying pan and a crossbow. He's using the frying pan as a kind of a makeshift shield. And he sees the king, and, well, he takes a lucky shot. Young boy with crossbow shoots the king straight in his heart, right about where the armor should be, but of course wasn't, because he's just too brave. And poor old Richard dies a death, a very ignoble death, killed by a random French child with a frying pan and a crossbow. Oh dear, what a damp end for such a brave and noble king. 5 stars, says Christine. Oh yeah. Only 1 star from Finn. Finn's not giving him any love. But you know, he's still one of our most famous kings. I mean, you say Richard the Lionheart, and it conjures all kinds of images of bravery and heroism. Yes, he wasn't a brilliant king. Yes, he didn't really like England. Yes, he got captured by random Austrians and didn't manage to defeat Jerusalem and got killed by a child. But other than that, he's a true Lionheart. All right. So after he dies, because he has no children, the kingdom goes to his brother, younger brother John. Now, at the time, John is known as John Lackland. He's called John Lackland because he lacks any land. When Henry II died, he gave land to his sons. Henry would have got the most of it, but he died before he could become king. Richard ended up with England. There was another son who got something else. John got nothing. I'm trying to... Gerald, maybe? Is it Gerald, his other son? I can't remember. John, he gets nothing. No land. So they call him John Lackland because, he's got some money and he's still a prince, but yeah, he hasn't got all that stuff. Why was the boy holding a frying pan? I believe he was holding a frying pan as a kind of makeshift shield because he wasn't a soldier, of course. Geoffrey, thank you, Captain Toad. Yes, I knew it was a G, but I couldn't remember which one. Thank you. All right. So, yeah, John has no land, but he does eventually become king. Now, you'll see here his dates of being king, 1199 to 1216. For the first 5 years of his reign, he does quite a good job. Possibly because really it's his mum that's helping him out. Eleanor of Aquitaine is still alive. By this point, she is in her late 70s when John takes over the throne. So she's an old woman, but she's still a very powerful woman, a very intelligent woman. And she definitely helps. Oh, Josh has given the child 87.9 stars. I don't think the child gets to have the star system. I think it's just the kings, but I mean, you do you. It's okay. Yeah, Eleanor helps him out. He starts off pretty well. He secures the land in France a bit better. He's, the good thing about him is that he's seen as quite a king who's very interested in justice. People, he makes the law courts much more powerful. Now, Richard had invented something. Richard the Lionheart, he'd invented something called coroners. Now, coroners were the first time in English history, at least, we'll come to the peaches, the first time in English history that you had these knights who were given the duty to investigate deaths. So, if a dead body ends up, someone finds a dead body and it's a bit mysterious, it's the coroner who will come, who is a knight, who will study the corpse and try and work out how they died and ask people what was going on and all this kind of stuff. So Richard comes up with that idea. John makes that much more official thing. Yeah, kind of early detectives. That's right. The first kind of, that's a good way of putting it, Grace. Yeah, an early detective. So John really doubles down on this. He makes sure that there's lots of coroners in England. He makes sure there's lots of judges. He takes power away from the church a little bit to give more power to the king's court rather than the religious courts. So that's definitely his positive. He makes the English legal system a lot more important, which is very similar to his dad, Henry II. One of the really good things that Henry II did was make a much more strong law court. So if we can say anything for these Plantagenet kings, they were interested in law and order and fairness, I suppose. The downside of that, though, is that some people say he only cared about the law courts and the coroners because he lacked land. And what he would do is he would spend a lot of his time in court, trying cases, trying to sort out who was innocent, who was guilty. And every time he went to court, of course, people would have to pay him for the privilege. So some people say he only cared about the law because it made him money. So I don't know. You can look at it one way or the other. Arya gave the child 100 stars. 100 stars for the child. Oh no. Oh, that's a good question, Laura. So yes, the picture here says Johannes Rex. There's always different ways of saying names. So I don't know where Johannes would come from. I don't know if that's Germanic or French, but it's a different version of John, basically. Rex means king. So King John, that translates as in English, but in Latin, it's Johannes Rex. There you go. Yeah, good question. Or I suppose Johannes Rex, it would be pronounced, I guess. Yeah. There's lots of strange things like that. King James the second is often called King Jacob, even though he wasn't. So yeah, it all gets bizarre. Good question, and well spotted. So, under the reign, a bit of a negative side here. John fancied himself as a great warrior like Richard, and whereas Richard was generally quite successful, I know he didn't take Jerusalem, but he was fairly successful in his warmongering. You can see here that by 1223, which is after the time of John, to be fair, but this erosion starts much sooner than that, John starts to lose a lot of land, which makes him double down that Lackland nickname, I guess. France is just eaten away, a lot of it by the Kingdom of France, but a lot of it taken by rebels and other barons and things. And John keeps on going down there to fight wars, and he keeps failing. And of course, every time he needs to fight a war, he raises the taxes. So anyone who thought, oh, thank goodness Richard is dead, we don't have to keep paying those taxes, wrong. You're going to have to keep paying it even more, because now John's in charge. He wants to fight more wars. But unlike Richard, at least Richard was bringing back loads of treasure at the same time. Yeah, he took Acre, he took Jaffa, he took Cyprus. He emptied all those places of money. John, on the other hand, he's fighting his wars, which cost a lot of money, and he's losing them over and over again. So his wars are costing double the amount, because not only is he having to pay to start the war in the first place, he's also not winning anything from the war, so all the money's going. So yeah, he's not great in that sense. A lot of the lands that he loses, as you can see, are Aquitaine, which are his mum's lands. His poor mum dies in 1204, just 5 years into his reign. And he just loses all her land after that. Poor old Eleanor of Aquitaine. Oh, it's harsh. Harsh indeed. He also gets a bit of a bad reputation because of his relationship with the Pope. Now, William II had a bad reputation with the Pope. They fell out. William was excommunicated, probably because of his sexuality, but also because he really didn't take the church very seriously. John fell out with the church. How old was she? She was 81 when she died, Eleanor of Aquitaine, which is incredible. I mean, just for medieval times, anyone living to that time is incredible. But to live that long, she spent 15 years of that in prison, imprisoned by her own husband. She was the mother to 2 kings, the husband to 2 kings. An incredibly powerful woman, probably the most powerful woman in medieval history, I assume, at least of Europe. Yeah. Rest in peace, Eleanor. Yeah, much respect. So she dies of old age. There's no horror story behind her. She just dies because she's lived a very long, full life. But John, he falls out with the Pope and the Church because he wants, when the Archbishop of Canterbury died, and we mentioned the Archbishop when we did William II, this, the most important religious man in England, the Pope at the time, I can't remember the Pope's name right now, I'll have a look, but the Pope at the time said, John, you need to have this guy, he's going to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury. And John said, no, I want my own Archbishop of Canterbury. And so they had a bit of a squabble. Now, I say squabble because they don't ever meet each other. It's done by letters. The Pope will send a letter saying you must do this, and John will send a letter back saying no. And so this goes on for a while, and in the end, the long and the short of it is excommunication, which, if we remember, means that God has turned his back on you, the Pope and the Church have turned their back on you, and if you die whilst excommunicated, you will go to hell, because there ain't no room in heaven for excommunicated people. You are no longer officially a Christian. You have been kicked out of the club. So, for John, who is quite a religious man, this is tricky. Yeah, he doesn't want to be excommunicated. I believe his excommunication lasts for about 4 years, and thankfully for him, he does make up with the Pope before he dies. So he doesn't end his life excommunicated, but it's certainly a rocky road there in the middle. He's got about a 4-year period where he's not very popular with the Christians in his country, because excommunication certainly reflects badly on all of them. So, John, he starts off all right. His mum dies, things start to go downhill. He starts to lose parts of France. He then really upsets, already he's upset Robin Hood, if Robin Hood exists. Now he's really starting to upset the rich people. Yeah, not just the peasants, but the nobles, the lords, all of these people. These are the people he's now annoying, because he keeps on raising those taxes. And he's got nothing to show for it. The taxes get higher as England gets smaller. What's going on? This isn't how it should be. And then we get to start to hear rumours that John isn't just, a bad king, but he's not a very nice person. Rumours start to circulate that his nephew, who died at a mysterious young age, was actually stabbed to death by John in a fit of rage. Ooh. One of the wives of the rebelling barons, he falls out with one of these barons, and he kidnaps her wife, and he locks her in the Tower of London, where she starves to death. Ooh. So it seems that he's, personally not a nice guy either. Does he have a victory dance? Unfortunately, John does not have a victory dance, because John very rarely sees victory. Oh yes, Laura, the siege of Rochester Castle. Well done. Yeah, good. Now, how much these rumours are true, it's unclear, because we have no evidence to say that he really did stab his nephew in a fit of rage, and we don't. This woman did get killed. Oh, I don't know what the. Laura's asking what year was the siege of Rochester Castle. Let me see if I can find out. I'll do some Google foo. So yeah, we don't have proof that he was being particularly evil, I guess. But the rumours were there. Add to that all the taxes. Add to that the falling out with the king. Add to that the loss of the French lands, and the people of England, they start to revolt. They are quite revolting. Let's see, where are we? Siege of Rochester Castle. What year is that? Let me see. Oh, I can't see it here. I'll have a look for you, Laura. I'll see if I can find out. It could well have been. It must have been around 1215, because that's, of course, when Magna Carta was signed. So I believe it was the same year as that. Yeah. All right. So things come to a head. The barons raise an army, and they march on London. Now, there's a lot of fighting going on in this period, and we're running low on time here, so we're not going to go into all the ins and outs of all the different places. But suffice to say that John, he's raising his army. He's trying to get all his troops together. Yeah, I know, Rebecca. I know. What is the photo of the of the dog with a crown? That, if anyone's seen the film, this is King John as represented in the Disney film Robin Hood, and he's a lion, not a dog, of course, because he's a Plantagenet, represented by the lion. His brother Richard in the film is a great big, tough lion, whereas John is like a baby lion. Yeah, which is a bit unfair, but there you go. So, the barons, they march on London, and they threaten to, take over and kill John. Yeah, let's get rid of him. Let's put our own king in place. John, he tries to drag together an army, but he knows that he's going to get beaten. So what he does, Rock has seen the Tom and Jerry version, cool. What John does is he agrees to a meeting. They take him to a field in a place called Runnymede. And there the barons sit him down, and they write up a great big list of demands, a list of things that they want to see changed in Britain. Not peaches yet. We will get to the peaches. Let me just find. I've got a little list here of the main points of Magna Carta to help remind myself. But Magna Carta is something that John has to sign in order for the barons to, well, leave him alone. And it's seen as a very famous document. 1215 is when it was signed, and it basically laid out the new laws for being a king. And here are some of them. Here we go. He had to accept that the king could no longer interfere with the church. So let the church have more power. He had to agree that he would no longer put noble people, barons, lords, into prison without a reason. You know, he had to have a good reason for it, and he had to prove that they were guilty first. He also had to agree that the trials that he put them on to find out whether they were guilty or not had to be done quickly. So you can't put someone in prison and say, you're going to have a trial, and then not give them a trial for 10 years. Okay, had to stop doing that. He had to stop raising unfair taxes for unfair reasons. Okay? He had to stop asking for extra taxes on top of the taxes that were already existing. Okay? Speed trials, yes, Elizabeth, yeah. And he had to let merchants travel the country and his lands in France without having to pay extortionate taxes. Basically, a lot of the points of the Magna Carta, which is a very long, dense document. Oh, you can see a copy of the original here, or here we go, a picture of the original. You'll notice there that it just looks like scribbles from here because it's so zoomed out. But this is what, you can tell there was a lot of information in that Magna Carta. He had to promise to things like trial by jury, so that instead of just the king deciding whether people were innocent or guilty, it were groups of people who came together to discuss it that would decide. And all of this stuff, he was basically told, if you don't sign this document, we are going to kill you. Power to the people, James. Yes, that's it. Or at least power to the lords. Maybe not quite power to the people. This isn't democracy, but it's definitely the first time in history that a king is giving some power away. And it will lead to things like parliament and then ultimately to democracy, but not for hundreds of years. Yeah, lots of rules here. Now, John signs this, but what the barons don't realise is that whilst he is signing it, metaphorically, John has his fingers crossed behind his back, because John has no intention of following any of these rules at all. He signs the document, he promises to be nice, he promises not to raise the taxes, blah, 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 blah. He goes back to London, and he forgets a lot of it, and he just carries on as normal. Now, luckily for the barons, unluckily for John, I don't know. This means that the war continues. He's still fighting against the barons. And in 1216, he starts another military campaign. The barons have finally lost their patience with him completely because he hasn't followed the rules of Magna Carta, and he's just, he keeps on pushing it and using his power for evil. Evil. 3 minutes for the peaches, Grace. And so, the story goes, and I was lucky enough to be, I managed, just before Christmas, just after Christmas, I don't know, in December, I went on a tour of Newark Castle, which is a castle in Nottinghamshire. And in that castle, you can stand in the spot where King John died. So I got to stand where he died. The story goes, he's on campaign. He's going all over the country. He's fighting, in York, and then he comes down to Lincoln. He's having all these battles, but he's losing. He's not in a great shape. As he leaves Lincoln, he loses a lot of his supply train, which means his army marches with loads of carriages and wagons. The story goes he loses the crown jewels. It gets sucked into the mud as he's trying to cross a river. He loses loads of food, and what he's left with is, for some reason, a massive amount of peaches. And he proceeds then to eat a massive amount of peaches. Oh, that's a good fact, Laura. Laura's saying that John couldn't read or write and the Magna Carta wasn't read out. This is true. John would have had a very limited idea of what he was signing. That's true. That gives him a bit of credit. I mean, none of these kings ever bothered to learn to read or write. Not yet. That's a peasant's game, or at least a monk's game at this time. So John, he eats a humongous amount of peaches, and they make him have quite severe toilet issues. Now, modern historians think that he was probably suffering from dysentery, which is extreme diarrhea already, and the peaches maybe exacerbated that. We're not entirely sure, but it's a good story. Basically, he fills himself up with peaches and then poos himself to death. like so many kings before him, so many kings to come. It often ends on the toilet, unfortunately, for these wonderful kings of England. So there you go. That's King John. Now, the crown will next pass to Henry III, and we'll have a look at him next time, along with Edward I. But yes, we get to see next Monday, we'll get to see some wonderful animals. Ooh, exotic animals. We'll talk more about the church and Henry III. And we will spend most of our time, though, with Edward I, the hammer of the Scots. Because we're going to see, for the first time, we're going to have Scotland and Wales come into our story in a big way. Oh, yes. Thank you very much, everyone. Yeah, have a wonderful day, and I will see, hopefully, a lot of you tomorrow for D. D is for Denmark. So it seems there was a vote on Facebook. It looks like Denmark has won that one. So a lesson on Denmark tomorrow. Thank you very much. Have a brilliant day. And bye.